So today for Black History Month, we're kind of doing something different. Typically, we have a panel discussion, but at our meeting, we actually have a video. We'll take a look into the video and then we can just have a discussion around it.
I was facilitating a workshop on implicit bias to a group which included law enforcement. There were about 70 participants in the room, most of whom were white. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, particularly given it was a mandatory learning opportunity, and the fact that I'm a Black woman and a civilian wasn't going to help. Early on in the workshop, I asked one man how he identified racially. It's best not to assume because you can't always tell based on the color of someone's skin. I've made that mistake before. His response, American. In that moment, I knew he was white. We don't know how to have healthy, productive conversations about race, racism, and race relations in this country. Many white people grow up in towns where there are very few, if any, people of color. Even those who do grow up in diverse communities will say race wasn't talked about. And then there are those who are taught racism is a thing of the past. So it's usually not until white people leave that town, go off to college, date a person of color, or join an organization where they begin talking about race, or even exploring what it means to be white. But parents of color, of children of color, tend to talk with their children about race. Most of us can tell you an early experience of racism. So by the time we become adults, not only do we understand what it means to be a person of color in this country, we're more prepared for the experiences we're likely to face. Our differences in experiences and what we've been taught cause white people and people of color to take very different approaches to race conversations. People of color will often speak to our collective experiences. For example, Black people will use language like we, us, and my people, acknowledging our identities make us a part of a larger group. White people, on the other hand, are encouraged to operate under colorblind thinking. They'll take three approaches that ignore the impact of race on our daily lives. One common way white people will engage in race conversations is the universal approach. The universal approach is when white people react to racism by saying, we're all human, we all bleed. Why do we have to talk about differences? Talking about differences just divide us. Talking about differences doesn't divide us. It's not acknowledging racism still exists and not talking about it that does that. We're all human. We all bleed. Y'all, before stepping on this stage, I didn't think to myself, I wonder how many watching will be human. That we're all human should be a given. Speaking universally does not move race conversations forward. We do need to keep it as a part of the conversation because, quite frankly, we don't treat everybody in this country as if they're human. But that's not what race conversations are about. Another common way white people will engage in conversations about race is the individual approach. The individual approach is when white people talk about who they are as individuals. I have children who are Asian. I work with someone who's Latino. My best friend is Native, and my favorite, I don't care if you're black, purple, blue, or green. When you try to hold them accountable for that thing they said or did that was offensive. These are all attempts at colorblind thinking. I want to pause here for a moment and let my white brothers and sisters and non-binary friends in on a little secret. The moment you tell a person of color you don't notice their race, you're actually letting them know you notice their race. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you met a white person and said to them, I just want you to know I don't see color? Colorblind thinking comes from a good place. When I hear it, I think white people are trying to tell me they're not racist, they won't treat me unfairly because of my race, and they won't judge me because of our differences. But what I want to know is, why does an important part of who I am have to go away in order for you to do those things? I mean, why can't I be Black and you treat me fairly, work on your bias, and become an anti-racist? Colorblind thinking is a part of early socialization for white people. Did you know it's about the age of 3 when children begin to ask us all those questions when we realize we're not as smart as we thought we were? Let's imagine there's a white child, she's 3 years old, riding the bus. She asks her mom, Mommy, why is that man so chocolate? And the chocolate man can hear her ask the question. He's not tripping. He knows that when children are curious, they ask questions in this way. Who's he paying attention to? The mom. He's probably thinking, I wonder how she's going to handle this one. And what do parents do in these moments when children ask questions loud enough so the person who is different can hear? We shush them. And what's the message that children get? Not only do they learn it's not okay to talk about differences, they get a deeper, more damaging message. It's not okay to be different. Then when white children become adults, they'll say anything about a person other than their race. You see that person over there in the purple hat and blue shoes and green coat? You mean the Asian one? Why didn't you just say so? They know they're Asian, by the way. Imagine instead of shushing their children, parents normalized our differences. Maybe this mom says to her child, honey, people are lots of different colors. She holds out her hand and asks, what color are we? We're all human. We all bleed. But that's not what race conversations are about. They're about the group approach. The group approach is where we become curious about collective experiences. What's it like for women to work the same jobs as men but get paid less? What's it like for people to have disabilities and have to advocate every day for access to opportunities that others take for granted? What's it like to be second, third, fourth generation Asian or Latino and have people tell you, you speak such good English? I met a woman once who said when people tell her she speaks such good English, she says to them, thank you, you do too. What's it like to be Black, brown, indigenous, and be killed by police at much higher rates than your white counterparts, even when unarmed? Let's take a look at the Black Lives Matter movement, a group approach, to better understand how these other two approaches take us off course, preventing us from moving race conversations forward. A common reaction to Black Lives Matter is, all lives matter. Do all lives matter? Of course they do. And if you're still contemplating whether all lives matter, you're thinking about this way too deeply. Yes, all lives matter. Another typical reaction to Black Lives Matter is, blue lives matter. Do blue lives matter? Of course they do. Blue Lives Matter is an example of the third approach white people take to race conversations. It reminds me of times when my husband and I will argue. I'll tell him something he does that bothers me. He'll defend himself by saying, well, what about when you do? And he'll start listing off all these things that I do that bother him but have nothing to do with what I was trying to bring to his attention. This takes the focus away from my concern and places it on his. Listen, I can't imagine what it would be like to have a job that was so dangerous. Every time I left for work, I didn't know if I would ever see my family again. But the saying Blue Lives Matter wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Black Lives Matter. It is a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, and it is another group. Black people were never questioning whether Blue Lives Matter, nor were we suggesting that all police are bad. In fact, Blue Lives Matter fails to recognize that Black people also have loved ones in our lives who are in law enforcement. And besides, people are not born blue. The Black Lives Matter movement is about structural racism. If we are ever going to effectively address race, racism, and race relations in this country, it means we must also talk about what it means to be white. Our white brothers and sisters and non-binary friends struggle with this. They're not used to looking at themselves as a part of a racial group. If you are white, one way you can assess whether taking the group approach to race conversations is difficult for you. Examine how you felt hearing me say white people 15 times throughout this talk, and I'm not even finished yet. You may have thought to yourself, I'm not like that. Why is she trying to make us feel guilty for being white? Or maybe you shifted the focus to your own marginalized group. What she needs to be talking about is gender equality. Poverty is the real issue. What about disabilities? Nobody seems to be talking about that. Or maybe you went to your relationships. I dated a Black guy as proof you're not like one of those white people I've been talking about. This, in part, is what it means to have white privilege. The individual white you is innocent until you prove yourself guilty. People of color rarely get to be seen as individuals. We are guilty until we prove ourselves innocent. When white people go to the universal, to the individual, or deflect the conversation to another group experience, they're actually colluding with racism. The conversation becomes about whether all lives matter, how your one friend is all the proof you need to discredit an entire group's experience, or how the lives of police matter too. All the while, when it comes to Black, brown, and indigenous people, people are shooting first and asking questions later. And I mean that figuratively and literally. John T. Williams, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Elijah McClain, Jacob Blake, William Green, Mike Ramos were all guilty first. Their race a threat, the given of their humanity disregarded, ignored, forgotten. Their individualism negated. Dismantling structural racism means we must acknowledge it exists. Talk about the impact on the lives of people of color. Work together to pull it apart piece by piece. But that won't happen as long as our white brothers and sisters and non-binary friends aren't willing to admit race matters. So what can white people do? Deconstruct how you've been socialized and reconstruct a new way of being. Rather than seeing differences as negative or pretending you don't notice at all, recognize that it is our differences that make America great. Become aware of your bias, acknowledge your whiteness and the privileges it holds. Take the time to learn about diverse group experiences and listen and believe the stories we tell you. Learn to become comfortable with the discomfort. Lean into it, feel it. Wonder where it's coming from. Unpack institutional, systemic, and structural racism. And then join us in taking action to advocate for change. Because yes, we're all human. And yes, we all bleed. That's why Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Does anyone have any comments on the video that we just watched? Gretchen?
So I was thinking about that, and it said, think about your white privilege and recognize it. I think that's something that is hard for people to understand because everybody's life is hard. I might have a broken family, or I might, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have everything perfect. I didn't come from a wealthy family. You know what I mean? So I think that would be a great information to put out, is how do you recognize? Like, there was some video recently where it talked about, all these kids were on a line and you took 2 steps forward if you had 2 parents. You took 2 steps forward if it was a double income family. And that really helped me understand white privilege, because I've always heard about it, but it was only until, somewhat recently that I really understood it. And I don't understand it completely because it's just my life. And I live in a homogenous area. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I totally understand what you're saying. It's funny that you started off with that, because I'm thinking while watching the video, how would a white person really dive into or even begin to know or understand? The only advice that I can give you is listen. But that's it. How do you guys think you can be an effective ally at work? Because, we do work with, like, I know in Western Mass, a large population of our shared living providers are people of color, right? And things come up, and then the people that they support may be someone who's not a person of color. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that come up with that, and also just in the office and working with coworkers. So, have you guys thought about how you can be an effective ally at work? George?
If I can, I may give some context to this, because in our last, it was about a year ago, evaluation, we were able to, in some way, demographically separate the answers on the evaluation. And I was disappointed in the response of I was disappointed in the fact that I thought that Nonotuck was a place where, and this may be very Pollyannish, but a place where that might be better than most places when it came to acceptance of different people's culture. But the responses from people of color didn't express that. There was a certain amount of reservation. I don't want to go as far as mistrust, but a certain amount of reservation around authority, definitely clearly around authority within the organization. I give context to this question that you provide, Nicole, because I think that it's important that in some way, particularly I think that if you're a supervisor, that we sort of think about how we're responding as supervisors to people from different cultures or different color, and think about sort of the power dynamic. As opposed to sort of people not of color, there was a great amount of trust and feeling of support from the staff at Nonotuck. So we knew that we had to do something. And we hoped that it might start here in making or creating a culture at Nonotuck that was more sensitive and more supportive.
Thank you. Christopher?
I think that for somebody from my background, it really starts with being available and open and to listening and learning, because I was right there in the demographic that, she spoke to at the beginning, where I didn't, have a chance to have any relationships with people of color until I was well into high school, the area I grew up in. Just acknowledging that's my jumping off point, is to be open and be willing to hear different people's input wherever they're coming from.
Thank you. Diane?
She said in the video a couple of words that struck me that to always remember is obviously recognize differences is key in acknowledging that. And I've heard so many people say that exactly what she was giving as an example, that the all lives matter and we bleed the same and all of that, but that's not true. And you need to, by saying that, you're not validating anyone else. So making sure that we're acknowledging and recognizing that is very important.
Thank you. Mario?
One of the things that she said struck me because it reminded me when I moved to Mass. I'm originally from New York, and I remember people telling me, I hear an accent. I hear an accent. I didn't know what that was. That was when I was here in college, and I was, I have an accent, but that made me feel like I'm a little different. I'm just different. Or some people would tell me, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from the Dominican Republic. Oh, but I know your sisters and you guys don't look alike. And I'm like, well, no, because like for instance, Carla's my sister, but we don't look alike. And I have another sister that's like light skinned, blonde hair, yellowish green eyes. I don't know. I never understood that. So I remember the accent and I still get it to this day. Now I'm more educated to tell people, where the accent comes from if they ask me, and just educate them. But that's something that I remember that always happened to me. And I didn't know how that affected me, like how I felt, or how that was in a way racist, or people weren't educated about it. But that was something that she said that really struck me. Also about my curly hair, I had people ask me, can I touch your hair? I've never seen curly hair. And I found that I don't go around asking people to touch their blonde hair because I've never seen it. It just made me feel a certain way. And just she reminded me about that. But I didn't experience racism in New York growing up. Just so many people, different cultures, backgrounds. But moving here to Mass was just huge and different. And going back to what George said, I've been in Nonotuck for 10, 11 years, and I've had different supervisors from different backgrounds, and I've been lucky. I've had great supervisors that never made me feel less or different. Like I felt great. They were very understanding. Carrie was my first supervisor, and I always tell her, you were the best boss I ever had because I learned so much from her. She was so understanding with my background, my kids, she was there to listen, and I felt great with that.
Thank you, Mariel. And I get the hair thing. I came into the office one day with braids and it was, can I touch? Can I touch? And it was almost like you're at a petting zoo. So I get it. George?
Yeah, Diane's comment and her perception of the TED Talk reminded me of something that I think is really important to us, and that is that for a long time now, I've heard from particularly the Black community that they don't want people to say, well, I'm colorless, I'm colorblind, I don't see the differences in color, and they say, well, stop that, see me as a Black person because I'm Black. And what relevance that has to the work that we do is that I think that from that pride has taken over in the disability community. And they too have asked many of the people with disabled, we moved as able people to not define people by their disability. And more over the last 5-10 years, people with disabilities have said, no, screw you. I want to be defined by my disability. I am disabled. So instead of saying, I'm one of these people that say this person who happens to have a disability, they're saying, no, put disabled first, a disabled person. I'm a disabled person. And so we've talked about that, I think, in this forum before. And the way to go around that is to really ask how the people we work with or the people happen to be disabled, yes, how do you want to be addressed if I write about a person that happens to have a disability, or are you a disabled person who may happen to be a writer or, a filmmaker or whatever. So it's just sort of a moment that the Black community has sort of moved the disabled community to recognize their own sort of taking pride in who they are, even if it happens to be the disability.
Thank you, George. That's actually a good point. Does anyone else have anything to add to today's discussion? Thoughts, comments? I thought this was a really good discussion. Thank you for everyone who participated in the discussion. I know it's not always easy to get up here and talk in front of people, talk in front of a camera, and especially about topics that are so vulnerable. And I appreciate everyone who stayed on the food for thought and just listened and absorbed any information, things that they may have learned or things that they can take from this and go back and kind of reflect on it and then apply some action, hopefully, in the future. I do look forward, and the DEI&B committee does look forward to continuing these conversations throughout the year. And if any of you have suggestions, you can always reach out and email if there's something that you feel like you want to talk about, or bring it to the committee. You're always welcome to join committee meetings as well. Because I do see there's a lot of you that come to these events, and you guys are like regular people who attend the events. So we would love to have you as a part of the committee as well, if you can find time. That's just my little shameless plug. Josh, do you have anything to say before we end the discussion?
No, I agree with everything you just said. I really appreciate everybody showing up and being vulnerable and willing to talk, bearing with me through my technical snafus as well. I think it was a great discussion, and I'm glad that we did it.
I want to underscore what has just been said. We really want additional people to be involved in our committee, and we just made a big push to have people join our wellness committee, and I think we've attracted several different people for that committee, and we'd love to have you be part of our committee. We'll send out a message a general message so you'll know when our next committee meeting is, and if you can make it, we'd love to have you be part of it. There's a lot of work to do. It's fun. It's educational. It's a great group. So, it gets you out of the day-to-day sort of work that you have to do. It gives you something else to think about and to work on something that really, really matters. So again, we encourage you to join the committee.
Thank you, George. I appreciate all of you. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Nonotuck Resource Associates is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit for shared living and adult family care. See our website for details.